Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in, and a special thanks to the Games for Change coordinators for the opportunity to speak. Susanna, appreciate the most generous introduction right there. It looks like it's been an amazing day one here at the conference. For those of you I haven't had the opportunity to meet, I'm Jason Horn. I'm a managing director at GSV Ventures. Thought it might be helpful to do a really quick intro on who we are for those that don't know us. GSV as a firm invests exclusively in the edtech sector, and we strive to back the most transformative entrepreneurs and companies delivering learning and career outcomes at scale. We invest all over the world, and since 2016, we've backed over 60 portfolio companies, 8 of which have gone on to become unicorns so far, with valuations over $1 billion. Across the whole portfolio, our companies reach just over 450 million learners, if you can believe it, every single month around the world. And we've had the pleasure of working with some incredible companies, some of which you likely have heard of, like Coursera, which was one of our biggest investments, which just went public earlier this year. Masterclass, Photomath, Guild, Education, and Quizzes, just to name a few. Today, I'm excited to talk about opportunities not just in EdTech, but where learning and gaming collide. As we'll talk about, we think education is an exciting place to be both an investor and an entrepreneur. Not only is the financial opportunity great, but providing quality education is obviously incredibly important for the success of individuals, for companies, and indeed for entire nations. We think some of the most important and most successful learning companies of the future won't necessarily be hardcore games, but will absolutely take lessons from games and game mechanics to create powerful learning experiences. So my talk today is somewhat short, so I'll keep it pretty high level. But I do look forward to digging in a little bit further in the Q&A session that will immediately follow that if you're so inclined. And of course, after the event, for those who want to follow up, we'd love it. Just previewing the next couple of slides then. First, I'm going to provide some context on the booming edtech sector, especially in light of the unprecedented year we've just had. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about a few simple tools we use as investors, namely our investment themes and research-driven approach. And then I'll talk about frameworks we use to evaluate individual investments. Hopefully, when you look through that lens, you'll see why we and others think the opportunity for learning games is too good to ignore. So it is really fun to be here, in particular because I actually had the opportunity to speak to this audience, Games for Change, 4 years ago, in the summer of 2017. 4 years might not seem like that much time, but as the folks in the audience know, in technology, 4 years can be an eternity. So naturally, I went back to look at my presentation to see how it stood up. And what's, I'm sure, no surprise, the enthusiasm that we have for digital learning today was really no different then, and I think for good reason. The several trillion-dollar education sector was, and frankly still is, highly under-digitized, but was rapidly shifting towards digital approaches, creating tons of opportunity for innovators. Infrastructure, improved infrastructure, cloud technologies, ubiquitous devices in the home and in classrooms were allowing businesses to establish network effects, really for the first time, and to reach unprecedented levels of scale, companies that we refer to as quote unquote weapons of mass instruction. And last but not least, an appropriate amount of capital was finally flowing into a sector that had really long been undercapitalized. As the chart here on the right shows, there was just a remarkably consistent year-over-year increase in capital flowing into the sector, driven by the quality of entrepreneurs, strong business models, compelling exit activity, and of course, the impact that companies were having as more investors were looking to balance profit and purpose. And of course, we see more and more of that today. In short, when I was here last in 2017, 4 years ago, EdTech was already a really quite compelling place to be both an entrepreneur and investor. And then this happened. Obviously, COVID was a total tragedy in so many ways, and its impact on consumer behavior was massive and lasting. Whether it was in entertainment or commerce or work, as the whole world was forced indoors and online, we saw really a decade of digital adoption in a matter of days. Obviously, countless examples, well-known examples now of how the COVID tragedy really was an accelerant of past behaviors, whether it was Zoom and its unbelievable growth, increasing its daily active user count by 30x, or Disney Plus, which achieved 50 million subscribers in just 2 months, unbelievably, which took Netflix 7 years. And of course, as this crowd knows, the gaming sector was no stranger to the acceleration of digital adoption trends either. Look no further than the successes of Roblox and other gaming leaders who are quickly taking over the screen time of young people, or the velocity of investment activity flowing into the sector. Like we saw earlier, capital flows, as they say, to where it is well treated. And with the acceleration of the sector globally, gaming attracted record levels of investment capital and a number of blockbuster deals, some of which are listed here, including the great IPOs of Roblox and Unity. But again, to this crowd, the activity in the game sector was probably no surprise, as COVID simply accelerated existing trends. Video games have for years been the fastest growing form of entertainment by far, by the way, with especially compelling trends around the Gen Z population, who prefer gaming by far as their most preferred entertainment activity. And by the way, Gen Z makes up 40% of consumers today, so you better pay attention. But getting back to education, where I focus, I'm not sure any market was impacted as dramatically and as permanently as digital education. So going back 14, 15 months to March of last year, over 1.5 billion students were instantly forced online. As my partner, Michael Moe, likes to say, over 20% of the world's population was suddenly thrown into the digital deep end. Some sank, some swam to the edge of the pool and said they'd never do it again, but most saw the value of digital approaches to teaching and learning and will never be the same. The sudden and then prolonged engagement with digital learning has changed the sector forever. We think of it as a major transitional period in the education sector. Basically, we went from BC to AD, before Corona to after disease. Just to put some numbers around the transitional period and what it means for the opportunity, pre-COVID, or BC, education was a $7 trillion category, already rapidly becoming digitized, with digital learning, or we refer to as EdTech, being a $160 billion market that we had expected to reach $1 trillion over the next 15 years. Post-COVID, or AD, we expect EdTech to reach $1 trillion in half the time. Incredibly, this is actually the same chart I showed you earlier, showing the amount of venture and growth capital flowing into EdTech globally. The growth trends that look absolutely massive in 2017 are clearly dwarfed by the recent activity. In 2020, EdTech attracted over $13 billion of investment activity, more than twice the prior year, and is on pace to do well above that this year. Just since the beginning of COVID, over 12 unicorns have been minted in the sector. Close to $60 billion in market cap was added, and of course, that's about to get a lot bigger with the recent filings or listings of companies like Duolingo, Instructure, Thinkific, PowerSchool, and several others. So hopefully that sets the stage a bit for what's happened, and with over $800 billion coming online in this market in just the next 7 to 8 years, why EdTech is so exciting for us investors and for entrepreneurs alike. COVID was the really mother of all accelerants across a number of consumer areas, including gaming and where we focus, learning. And for the rest of this talk, what I really want to do is focus on where these two worlds collide. So I'm going to first talk about sourcing investments and where we're looking for investments. And then I'll talk a little bit about how we evaluate specific opportunities. So first on where we're looking. We as a firm have always been really students of the sector and taken a research-driven approach. And as part of that, we develop what we call investment themes that we believe capture where the opportunities are and where they will be. And then, of course, we look for companies and entrepreneurs that align with those themes. So I've listed a couple themes here. These aren't all of them. I certainly won't cover them all today, but I did want to speak to three as they're particularly relevant, I think, to where learning and games collide. So starting here, an important theme that we think about a lot, we call Hollywood meets Harvard. This is obvious, I'm sure, to everybody, but it's awfully hard to learn something when you're not paying attention and when you're not engaged. But engagement is what Hollywood does best. The best films, the best TV shows, they engage audiences, they create immersive experiences, they're unforgettable, they create stars. We're really excited about learning companies that are taking a page out of Hollywood's playbook and creating memorable, high production quality content that truly, truly engages learners. A different but really related theme we call invisible learning. This is essentially learning without even realizing you're learning, when learning is really a byproduct of some other activity. There are tons of great examples of companies that play on these two themes. Masterclass, one of our investments, a great example of Hollywood meets Harvard. XR, VR companies, another great example. But games do a particularly great job here, in our view, creating engaging scenes, and in some cases, creating opportunities for learning without a user even realizing it. The last theme I'll quickly touch on is what we call return on education, which is really about impact. And of course, if you're an education company or entrepreneur and you're not thinking about impact and learning outcomes, you're completely missing point. So when we think about impact, we use a simple framework we call return on education, or ROE. And companies that do well here, that deliver strong ROE, really do some or all of these four things. They increase access, they lower costs, they provide leverage to the educator, whoever that may be, and they measurably improve outcomes. In short, we think companies with the strongest ROE delivering the best outcomes will ultimately be the most successful, which is why we care about it so much. So, why is this so important for learning games? Well, obviously, it's because learning games can be incredibly powerful tools for efficacious learning. Like with many of the most effective educational content, games are just inherently adaptive, inherently self-paced. Games are also repetitious. You're playing a game, you try again until you succeed. That is not usually a behavior you see often in traditional education. I mean, how many people have heard of a student doing their homework twice? Probably no one. But that's the kind of thing we're seeing exactly at companies like Quizzes, one of the great companies that we have the privilege of working with, where students and teachers are creating gamified quizzes that students complete, and then they compete with their peers and they take the quizzes over and over again to improve their scores. I love this slide, and I love this quote from Anna Lorena, who is at Synthesis, another really kind of exciting company that plays in this space of educational games, which says, most online learning platforms are designed for teachers and administrators, not for kids. Game designers should be in charge of this. In my mind, that is exactly the right point. Games are the fastest growing form of entertainment for a reason. Smart education entrepreneurs and even teachers will look at what's working in games and then weave the very best of game mechanics and game design into their products and into their pedagogy. When a bunch of academics get into a room and create content, it's called curriculum design. When game experts get in a room to create games, it's called game design. What I'm really excited to see more of, really my call to action, is for more companies to combine these two disciplines, creating products that are truly focused on learning outcomes, on sound pedagogy, but also on being fun, engaging, and memorable. Other thing I was just thinking through as I was preparing for this talk, I've been thinking a lot about how it's not just edtech entrepreneurs that can learn a lot from games, but even actually teachers too. I was reading up on a concept that game developers have been talking about for years called time to fun, which is basically how quickly after you turn on a game are you having fun while playing it. And the best games today obviously don't force people to sit through long introductions, character customizations. They just get players right into gameplay immediately. They're having fun, and then they layer in and introduce information and increase complexity over time. When I was reading about that, I thought to myself, wow, that sounds exactly like something a great teacher would do. When you're introducing a new subject, for example, they probably aren't starting with a long lecture or having students just sit in the classroom, open their textbooks and start reading. A great teacher might say, how do I get my class engaged and excited about this topic before I dive in? How do I shorten time to fun? And they might start class with something like a Kahoot quiz, a product I'm sure most people here are familiar with, which kids just go absolutely crazy for, and you really get them excited before they dive into a subject. So investment themes guide where we're looking for investments. And from that, hopefully, it seems clear to me and others that games will play a really important role in the future of learning. But what about how we evaluate opportunities? As a team, we meet close to about 2,000 companies a year. So obviously, we need a way to consistently evaluate businesses and identify the future stars of tomorrow. So the last thing I really want to talk about is this, how we look at companies and why when you think about this approach, the opportunity for learning games is clearly worth spending time on. So internally, we use a framework that we call the 5 Ps. The 5 Ps we look at are listed here: people, product, potential, predictability, and purpose. And companies that perform well across these areas get us really excited. The first P is people. And frankly, it's by far the most important one, where we spend most of our time. There is no shortage of great ideas, but great entrepreneurs are really what make the difference. Great entrepreneurs bring unique insights and experiences to an opportunity. They surround themselves with great people, and they're just totally talent magnets. And one of the things that we're most excited about as investors in this space is just the quality of entrepreneurs bringing their talents into the education sector these days. And we're just blown away constantly by the caliber of talent that we meet every day. In my talk 4 years ago that I mentioned, actually one criticism I raised about the educational game opportunity was that the major game companies had really barely focused on education, and the ecosystem was weakened as a result. In the last few years, at least in my view, that has dramatically changed. Leading companies like the ones listed here, Roblox, Unity, Epic, Microsoft, and really several others seem to be committing real resources to the education sector finally. Roblox even acquired an assessment business last year that was focused on education called Embellis. And you could even spend time talking about how Roblox really is an education company today, or at least incredibly well positioned to disrupt education, maybe for another time. So going back to people, obviously as the leading game companies lean in here, it means some of the smartest people in games are focused on education. Great for the sector, great for the opportunity, we think. The second P is product, where really we're looking for truly differentiated offerings. When you think about learning, games have really the potential to create totally differentiated experiences. The frame on the left, some might be familiar with, is from Assassin's Creed Discovery Tour, where learners can freely explore ancient Egypt with guided tours and historical sites to discover. What do you think is going to engage kids more? An immersive virtual museum like the one here, or a lecture and a textbook? I think the answer is quite obvious. Then we look at potential. Essentially, how big can the opportunity be? What is the addressable market? And for companies here straddling themes of education and games, you're playing into absolutely just massive markets. Over 3 billion players globally, 1.5 billion learners worldwide. Both EdTech and games represent roughly $200 billion markets, respectively, today. So huge, huge markets. The fourth P, predictability. This is really about business models, with the most attractive companies having predictable operating results, path to profitability, and recurring revenue. And again, game companies, including those in education, can score incredibly well on this dynamic. In fact, we've seen a lot of smart business model innovation around games. You have powerful platform business models like Unity and Roblox. You see companies like Prodigy Games in Canada, which has really circumvented, in a way, the difficult long sales cycles in schools with a really unique, innovative B2B to C model. And predictability shows itself in unit economics. So you see some numbers here. Unity has a net retention rate of 138%, really world-class. Kahoot is over 100%, has over 750,000 paid subscribers, really strong metrics, and all point to highly predictive business models. It looks like I'm out of time, actually. That's the end of the main section of the talk here. I could have talked a little bit more about specific companies. In the interest of time, I will wrap. Just wanted to thank everyone for their time. Hopefully something in there was helpful for some of you. I know this is an audience of incredible talent in the world of gaming, but it is the Games for Change conference. So if you really want to make an impact, I do hope some of you will bring your expertise to the education sector, where the opportunity to make a change is really massive and global. And if you're doing that, of course, we would love to talk to you. There's a Q&A session immediately after this, which I'm really excited to do. I think the team is going to drop that link in the chat, and I hope to see some of you there. Thanks, everyone.